Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So a lot of interesting news has come out this week thanks to Star Wars Celebration. We tried to get a press invite, but apparently warning people about the dangers of dolphins, encouraging Ewok hunting and poaching and consumption, along with wearing V-necks has disqualified from attending the event. That's not what they said, but I'm assuming that's what happened. Anyway, one of the cool things to come out of this event was the release of a new Clone Wars Season 7 trailer. Now, we had already suspected that the Bad Batch storyline that was leaked a while back would be picked up in this season. This would cover the Battle of the Naxos and feature everyone's favorite clone, Captain Rex, and the 501st, along with Anakin Skywalker, and apparently Ahsoka returns in some way as well. What I really want to see, though, in this season is how Rex goes from fighting in the GAR to living on an ATTE in Rebels. At one point, he must have defected from the Clone Army, which I imagine wasn't all that uncommon, especially by the third year of the Clone Wars. What I want to examine today is just how the clones felt about the Jedi as the war progressed. The relationship between the clones and the Jedi is one of the more interesting subjects in the broader history of the Clone Wars. We have two organizations which oddly enough had extremely similar structures, but for one reason or another never really connected despite their shared experience. The Jedi and the clones were both essentially pressed into service. The clones were created for the sole purpose of serving the Republic, while the Jedi were normally taken away from their parents and homes at an extremely young age in order to be trained as Jedi. The clones didn't really have biological parents and quickly adopted their brothers and the Grand Army of the Republic as their family. The Jedi were purposely separated from their families and rarely ever saw them once they were inducted into the Order. This lack of choice and self-determination defines both organizations and the individuals in it. For the clones, it was a safety mechanism or guarantee that they would behave and be obedient and efficient soldiers on the battlefield. A soldier without a wife or kids or citizenship for that matter is a lot more flexible and more importantly more expendable on the battlefield. For the Jedi Order, the dissociation from their roots and family was a safeguard from their own emotions. Any type of attachment could potentially lead to irrational and emotional behavior and ultimately the dark side. But of course, that's kind of where the similarities stopped. The Jedi, despite their forced induction into the Order, were far more privileged than the clone troopers that served under them. First, the Jedi were allowed to age before they were given a job specialization. As younglings, all Jedi were grouped together and given general training in the Force, along with the basic education. The most naturally gifted and powerful younglings would be chosen to become Padawan learners and would serve as an apprentice to a Jedi Knight or Master. The rest of the younglings who weren't chosen would follow a different career path within the Jedi Temple in one of the other sectors and departments. Whether that was working in the library or becoming a part of the Exploratory Corps or joining the Agriculture Corps. The Agriculture Corps was pretty much one of the worst assignments you could have. You basically spent the rest of your life talking to Force-sensitive plants. I'm assuming there is probably a very high suicide rate in this department. But even then, once a Jedi becomes an adult, they have the freedom and ability to basically do whatever they want as long as they fulfill the tasks given to them by the Order. This was especially true for individuals who were on the more coveted path to becoming a Jedi Knight or Jedi Consular. The clones, on the other hand, were modified specifically for certain roles and positions before they were even born. There was very little choice in what they could become in the future. Some clones were given additional alterations at the genetic level, which gave them different personality traits and even physical traits, which allowed them to function in special roles. The Null Arcs and Commando clones were generally more aggressive, independent, and larger than your average clones. What made things worse was that the clones were all considered property of the Kaminoan cloners on permanent contract to the Grand Army of the Republic. So as you can see, the Kaminoans didn't see them as sentient beings, and some of the politicians and even some of the Jedi leaders also saw the clones in the same way. This meant that for the average clone, when they weren't fighting or training, they had no real freedom. As a clone, if you're lucky, you might get stationed on a world like Coruscant and get a few days of leave in the city, but other than that, most of your life was spent either on the battlefield, in a Republic base, or ship. In Legend, special ARC troopers were sometimes frozen cryogenically when they weren't in combat to preserve their youth. In order to increase production rates, the clones aged twice as fast as the average human being. This meant that for some clones, their entire life was battlefield to battlefield with just short cryo naps in between. Now, the juxtaposition of these two organizations immediately caused some issues. Both the Jedi Order and the Clone Army were organizations that created their tenets during times of peace, but in the middle of a war, these carefully constructed structures keeping everything working broke away and chaos reigned. The Jedi were clearly treated as upper-class citizens in the hierarchy within the Grand Army of the Republic. Even the most junior Jedi could still outrank a clone captain and even a clone commander, if the Jedi General in charge of the unit says so. And although the clones were generally good-natured and not prone to jealousy, they did, however, expect competent leadership. During the Battle of Ryloth, a Republic force attempted to breach a Separatist blockade over the planet. Padawan Ahsoka Tano was in command of a fighter wing that led the charge towards the enemy blockade. When her squadron started taking heavy fire and casualties, she disobeyed her master's direct order and pushed the attack, causing her to lose almost her entire squadron. Not only was she not reprimanded for her dangerous actions, she was given complete command of the entire Republic fleet hours later. Ahsoka was only 11 years old at the time and had no command experience. Ultimately, in the case of Ahsoka Tano, things would go on to work out. Not only would she become a very skilled combatant, she would also be a really good leader who actually had empathy for her troops, which was kind of rare within the Jedi Order. Other clones weren't as lucky and were under the command of Jedi leaders who saw them as no different from drones or inanimate objects. Basilisk Jedi General Pong Krell was known as a very capable leader, having successfully led the JAR to several victories. The only problem was his units usually had much higher casualties. During the Battle of Umbara, the 501st, usually led by Anakin Skywalker, was transferred to the command of Pong Krell, and it became immediately apparent why his units usually suffered such high casualties. Pong Krell held little regard for the safety of his troops and constantly exposed them on dangerous and risky maneuvers, oftentimes without any strategic purpose. It would later be uncovered that Pong Krell had turned against the Jedi and was attempting to sabotage the JAR from within. Now, these kinds of stories spread across the clone troop ranks very quickly, and it started painting a very negative picture of who the Jedi were. There were several other Jedi generals who were also famous for their distrust and even hatred of the clones. One was General Quinlan Vos, the Kefar Jedi, who openly criticized the clones and drew the ire of Cal Skirata and his Special Force clones. Ultimately, it was his distrust of the clone troopers, which probably saved his life when Order 66 was carried out on Kashyyyk, where he was stationed. Another Jedi, Ram Koda, also didn't trust in clones and saw them as inferior fighters when compared to normal human beings. He thought they were less intelligent and far too predictable, and raised his own army of soldiers, refusing to lead clones into battle. Now, another problem that strained the relationship between the clones and the Jedi was the fact that the Jedi were normally the only non-clones that were hanging around in the Grand Army of the Republic. The Jedi not only represented the Republic, but they also represented non-clones as far as the clone troopers were concerned. So whenever the clone troopers had any grievances, whether it was about, lack of R&R or how terrible the rations were, the blame would ultimately fall on the Jedi. But the biggest crime that the Jedi could commit was being unprepared and being incompetent leaders, which unfortunately happened a lot more than people realized. The Jedi were trained in using the Force, one-on-one combat, diplomacy, and a wide range of other things. But the Jedi weren't trained to be military leaders, and very few of them actually had military experience. This is also complicated by the fact that the Jedi weren't supposed to lead, they were supposed to serve. This was supposed to temper their egos and also limit them from taking actions that would harm and affect others. But now, as commanders, they had to make decisions on a daily basis that could get a clone killed. And because the Jedi Tenet didn't allow them to develop emotional bonds with their soldiers, most Jedi generals seemed cold and uncaring. As the war went on, battles like the one on Umbara and Geonosis, where massive amounts of clones lost their lives in pursuit of strategic goals, began creating dissent amongst the clone ranks. Order 66, however, was carried out before the breaking point, and it's very likely most clones probably would have shot their Jedi generals even without having a chip implanted in their head telling them to do so. There were exceptions, of course. There were good, caring Jedi generals, and there were clone troopers who really enjoyed fighting alongside the Jedi, but from the beginning, the Jedi and clones were kind of destined to fight each other. Another brilliant part of Palpatine's master plan. It should also be interesting to see if the shift in dynamics between the clones and Jedi starts happening in the 7th season of the Clone Wars during the grueling Battle of Anaxis, or maybe even the Siege of Mandalore. Now, before we end today's video, a special thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this episode. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 25,000 classes that can help you fuel your curiosity, creativity, and business. And with an annual subscription rate of just under $10 a month, it's a lot cheaper than signing up for a traditional education. Better yet, you get to choose exactly what you want to learn. And who knows, had the Jedi Council had a Skillshare account and taken some classes on, say, leadership, maybe the clones wouldn't have been so eager to execute Order 66. And if you sign up with our link in the description below, the first 500 people, sorry, no non-humans, will get their first 2 months of Skillshare for free. So guys, I hope you enjoyed our analysis of the relationship between clone troopers and the Jedi. I hope this plays a really big role in the 7th season of the Clone Wars. I think it's something that really needs to be talked about because obviously there's some really messed up things going on in that organization. Well guys, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.